The depths of human cruelty and strange coincidences are inexhaustible. We have collected shocking cases caught on camera and arranged them by levels, like an iceberg. On the surface are disturbing stories you may have seen in the news, but with every step deeper, we will uncover ever darker and more terrifying secrets. Do not switch off until the very end, because the most horrifying level, the one that will never appear on the main platform, is waiting for you in the finale. What you are about to learn will change your perception of reality. Level 1. The runner who pushed a woman under a bus early in the morning on the 5th of May 2017 on Putney Bridge in London. A scene unfolded that looked more like a Hollywood thriller than reality. A 33-year-old woman was calmly walking across the bridge when a male jogger ran past her. Nothing foretold trouble, but suddenly he violently shoved her straight into the roadway. The woman crashed hard onto the asphalt, ending up literally centimeters from the wheels of a bus on route number 430, which was moving at a speed of about 20 kilometers per hour. The driver miraculously managed to swerve at the last moment. The strangest thing happened 15 minutes later. The runner returned to the same place. The victim tried to speak to him, but he ignored her and continued his run as if nothing had happened. Fortunately, everything that had happened was captured by the bus camera, which launched a police investigation. The suspect was described as a white man in his 30s with short light brown hair and brown eyes. 50 men were checked, 3 were arrested, but all were later released. After a year of fruitless searching, the case was closed in June 2018. The identity of the man who almost ended another person's life remains a mystery. Mackenzie Shirilla. At first glance, the video looks absolutely ordinary. A car smoothly turns onto Progress Drive in a quiet business park. But what happened next had nothing to do with normality. Behind the wheel of a 2018 Toyota Camry was 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, her boyfriend Dominic Russo, and his friend Davian Flanagan. Several weeks earlier, after an argument, Mackenzie had already threatened Dominic that she would crash the car. Their relationship was described as toxic. Every time they quarreled, Mackenzie insulted her boyfriend, threatened him, and sometimes damaged his belongings. And then, on the 31st of July 2022, after they turned onto Progress Drive and Alma Drive, her rage broke loose. She accelerated the car to 160 kilometers per hour, yanking the steering wheel from side to side before crashing at full speed into a brick building. The result was fatal. Dominic Russo died at the scene. Davian Flanagan was rushed to the hospital, but later died from his injuries. Mackenzie herself was found unconscious behind the wheel. She survived with relatively minor injuries. In August 2023, Mackenzie Shirilla was found guilty on 12 counts, including purposeful vehicular homicide, assault, and drug possession. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment with the possibility of applying for parole after 15 years. What at first looked like a car accident was recognized as a deliberate and deadly act. Oriel Gray. On the 20th of October 2020, at about 2:20 p.m., 77-year-old Celia Ward was cycling along a shared pedestrian and bicycle path in Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire. Walking toward her was 46-year-old Oriel Gray. At the moment when they were level, Oriel suddenly shouted, "Get off the pavement!" and made a sweeping gesture with her left hand. Frightened, Celia veered off the path directly onto a busy road where she was immediately struck by a car. The elderly woman was pronounced dead at the scene. Oriel herself, who suffered from childhood cerebral palsy and partial blindness, did not even stop to check the victim's condition and simply continued on her way to collect a prescription at the pharmacy. Later, she was arrested and charged with manslaughter. On the 2nd of March 2023, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, in 2024, her lawyers managed to turn the case around, convincing the court that a shout and a hand gesture alone could not be considered an assault. The conviction was overturned, Gray was released, and a retrial was not ordered. But the death of Celia Ward did not become any less real because of that. Launching the shopping cart. On the 16th of February 2023, in one retail store, 36-year-old Rogerio Santos Dilva was waiting in line at the checkout. Suddenly, he stepped out of line, walked over to the area with empty shopping carts, grabbed one of them and, with icy calm, headed back toward the woman standing behind him. She, suspecting nothing, had already taken his place. And then Rogerio, like an athlete at a competition, raised the metal cart above his head and hurled it at the woman with all his strength. The cart crashed into her head with a loud bang, and she immediately lost consciousness. The surveillance cameras recorded this shocking moment while other customers rushed to help. When the victim regained consciousness, she was seated in a wheelchair and taken to the hospital. The attacker was detained on the spot. The 45-year-old woman, fortunately, did not suffer serious injuries. Later, she stated that she absolutely had not provoked this attack in any way. Level 2. The Rarick family, February 2021. Christina Rarick returned home and drove into her garage, not suspecting that someone had set an ambush for her. While she was parking, a man appeared from around the corner of the house and managed to slip inside before the garage door fully closed. This footage from the surveillance cameras became the last recording of Christina alive. Early the next morning, firefighters arrived at the Rarick's house in response to a call. When the fire was finally extinguished, they found the bodies of 56-year-old Christina and her husband, Andre Rarick, in the garage. The investigation came together like a puzzle, and the key piece was a recording from the camera of the house opposite. It clearly showed the killer, 30-year-old Harrison Brown, who had mutual business dealings with Christina. Investigators established that as soon as the garage door closed, Brown attacked the woman and stabbed her to death. Then, he inflicted multiple stab wounds on her husband. The shocking detail: the killer remained on the property until 9 p.m., and at dawn, he returned to intentionally set the house on fire and cover his tracks. On the 6th of March, 2021, Harrison Brown was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and arson. On the 1st of December 2023, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Level 3. Death in the freezer. On the 8th of September 2017, 19-year-old Kenika Jenkins borrowed her mother's car to go to a party with her friends. She never returned home. At about 11:30 p.m., Kenika and her 3 friends arrived at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Chicago. The party was on the 9th floor, in room number 926. The space, designed for 2 people, was crammed with almost 40 guests, but that did not stop the girls from having fun. Just 15 minutes after arriving, Kenika called her older sister. That was the last time her family heard her voice. In the next couple of hours, she drank cognac, actively posted videos, and went live on Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. By 3:15 a.m., her friends were ready to leave, but Kenika was already too drunk to walk on her own. Swaying and barely staying on her feet, she remembered that she had forgotten her phone and car keys upstairs. Her friends left her alone by the elevator while they went back for her things. When they returned, they found that Kenika was gone. Panic began. Her friends contacted Kenika's mother, Teresa Martin, and she arrived at the hotel by 5 a.m. But the staff refused to help without a police report, which was not filed until 1:15 p.m., many long hours after the girl's disappearance. The police began reviewing endless hours of surveillance footage. Eventually, they noticed her, alone, staggering down the hotel corridors, but did not see her leave the building or go outside. Finally, on the 10th of September, they found another recording. She had entered an unused kitchen area on a lower level, all alone. The staff were immediately told to check the area, but nothing could prepare them for what they would see. Kenika was found face down in a large industrial freezer, missing one shoe, frozen to death. There were no signs of trauma or assault, and authorities ruled the death accidental, hypothermia, aggravated by alcohol intoxication, and the presence of the prescription drug topiramate. But the girl's mother and the public did not believe this. She had never been prescribed that medication, and the cameras had not captured the moment she entered the freezer. Teresa Martin filed a $50 million lawsuit accusing the hotel of negligence. In December 2023, the parties reached a $10 million out-of-court settlement. The case was officially closed, although many questions remain unanswered. Courtney Lake. On the evening of the 7th of June 2017, 24-year-old Courtney Lake left her home in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland. At 7:54 p.m., she was seen getting into a black GMC pickup truck driven by her ex-boyfriend, Philip Smith. He had recently been released from prison, where he had served time for several crimes committed against Courtney herself. It was the last time she was seen alive. At the time of her disappearance, Courtney was torn between two former partners. Philip Smith, her most recent boyfriend, had been violent toward her back in April 2017. Her mother reported the assault, which ended their relationship. Another ex, the father of her son Oliver, was also trying to win her back. In May, Smith escalated the situation by sending intimate photos of Courtney without her consent to her new boyfriend. She filed another report, and the court prohibited Philip from approaching her. But on the 5th of June, Smith tried to contact her 33 times. When he received no answer, he came to her house. Courtney called the police, but he left before they arrived. He was later arrested and spent 2 days behind bars. After his release, he picked Courtney up, and she never returned. During interrogation, Smith later admitted that he had been with her that night, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. Since a body was never found, he was never charged. Months later, he was found dead himself near Bellevue Beach. The case remains open, and Courtney's family continues to search for answers and for her remains. Level 4. Deadly race in a Tesla. The morning of the 5th of November 2022 in the Chinese city of Chaozhou was supposed to be routine for the owner of a Tesla Model Y named Zhang. He was on his way to his cement shop, but an ordinary trip instantly turned into a waking nightmare. The problem began when he was unable to park. Suddenly, the car shot forward and began to accelerate uncontrollably, racing at high speed for a distance of about 2.6 kilometers. At first, the Tesla swerved to avoid colliding with a motorcycle, but just over a kilometer later, it slammed at full speed into another motorcycle traveling in the same direction. Its rider died at the scene. Even that impact failed to stop the car. The monstrous race continued. Moments later, the Tesla collided with a cyclist coming in the opposite direction. Thankfully, that person survived with minor injuries. Then there was a crash into a cargo tricycle, after which the Tesla jerked sharply to the right. It then rammed a garbage truck, struck a schoolgirl riding a bicycle, and smashed into a van before finally coming to a stop. 3 people, including Zhang himself, were seriously injured. The teenager, unfortunately, did not survive. After the accident, Zhang insisted that he had not been distracted or drunk. He claimed he had repeatedly tried to press the brake, but the car did not respond. Tesla, however, had its own version of events. A forensic analysis conducted by the company showed that the accelerator pedal had been pressed 100% in the seconds before the crash. At no point was any pressure on the brake recorded. In March 2023, a court-appointed technical examination concluded that the cause of the crash was driver error, not a technical malfunction. The company was cleared of responsibility. Now Zhang bears full legal responsibility for the tragedy that took 2 lives. The murder of Harshandeep Singh. On the 6th of December 2024, 20-year-old Harshandeep Singh was on patrol during his shift as a security guard when the unthinkable happened. Harshandeep was an international student from Haryana, India, studying at Norquest College in Edmonton, Canada. He had been in the country for only 18 months, and this was just his 3rd day on the job. While inspecting a stairwell in a residential complex, he encountered two people, 30-year-old Ian Ray and Judith Soto. Harshandeep was pushed down the staircase and before he could run, was shot in the back. Police responded to reports of gunfire in the building. When they arrived, they found Harshandeep unconscious. He was taken to the hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. Ian Ray and Judith Soto were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The disappearance of Rianne Coulson. On the 21st of May 2025, surveillance cameras recorded 34-year-old Rianne Coulson leaving the Church of St. Mary and St. Benedict in Coventry. She was wearing a black hoodie and ripped black jeans. She had just visited the food bank. Nothing seemed unusual, except for one fact. This was the last time she was seen alive. Rianne, the mother of one child, worked in the area. Her absence went unnoticed until the 17th of June, when she failed to get in touch with her twin sister Kristen on their shared birthday. This uncharacteristic silence alarmed her relatives, and the family reported her missing. West Midlands Police launched a large-scale investigation, assigning more than 100 officers to the case. Her family appealed to the public for help, hoping she would be found alive. Investigators combed through countless hours of surveillance footage, studied phone records, and collected more than 50 witness statements. But each passing day made hope for a safe return fade. On the 24th of June, police arrested 42-year-old Mohammed Durian on suspicion of involvement. Shortly afterward, Adam Moore was charged with assisting an offender. 3 days later, on the 27th of June, a body was discovered in Binley Woods near Coventry. It was later identified as that of Rianne Coulson. The investigation into her death continues. Her family has been left heartbroken, with unanswered questions and the devastating reality that Rianne never made it home. Lorraine Cox. On the 30th of September 2020, the family of 32-year-old Lorraine Cox reported her missing. Although messages continued to come from her social media accounts, her relatives sensed that something was wrong. The style of writing was off, with strange spelling mistakes and far-fetched excuses to avoid phone or video calls. They were convinced that someone else was pretending to be her. This concern triggered a police investigation in which officers reviewed hours of CCTV footage. In one of the recordings, the police found a clue that unraveled the entire case. 2 days earlier, Lorraine had been returning home alone after a night out with friends in Exeter. It was a familiar route, and she was walking calmly with her hands in her pockets. But she was not alone. Behind her, a man was slowly following before approaching her and persuading her to go with him to his flat above a kebab shop. Cameras later recorded him repeatedly leaving the building to dump items in trash bins across the city. But Lorraine herself was never seen leaving the house. The man was identified as 24-year-old Iraqi Kurd Azam Mangori, whose asylum application had been rejected and who was facing deportation. In his flat, he strangled Lorraine with her own t-shirt and left her body there for 8 days. During all that time, Mangori used her SIM card to impersonate her in social networks and messengers, trying to convince her family and friends that she was alive. But when a missing person report was filed, he panicked. He dismembered her body and scattered the remains around Exeter. Parts of her body were found in an alley near his home and about 9 kilometers away in a wooded area. On the 7th of April 2021, Azam Mangori was found guilty of Lorraine's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. Level 5. Lee Pomeroy. Death in a train carriage. On the 4th of January 2019, at about 1 p.m., Lee Pomeroy boarded a train at London Road Station in Guildford with his 14-year-old son. Nothing foretold trouble until 36-year-old Darren Pensill entered the carriage at the next stop. What should have been an ordinary trip home turned into a tragedy. Shortly after departure, Darren got into an argument with Lee over a blocked aisle. The argument lasted only a few seconds, and Darren walked away into another carriage. It seemed the incident was over, but Lee could not just let it go. He followed his offender, leaving his son alone. In the next carriage, the confrontation flared up again. The men shouted and pointed fingers at each other. And then, in only 25 seconds, Darren pulled out a knife and stabbed Lee 18 times. The killer fled the train at the next station, where his girlfriend was waiting for him. Meanwhile, Lee's son remained alone in the carriage, while paramedics at Horsley Station pronounced his father dead. Darren Pencil was arrested the next day at his girlfriend's home. On the 12th of July 2019, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Falling onto the tracks. On the 3rd of June 2025, surveillance cameras at the LRT Pa Bandar Puchong station recorded a heartbreaking moment when tragedy resulted from simple carelessness. A 36-year-old man from Taiwan was walking alone right at the edge of the platform when he accidentally fell onto the train tracks. As soon as his body hit the ground, he lifted his head and saw a train approaching. It was too late to run back. The train plowed into him, stopping only a few seconds later. Witnesses froze on the platform in horror, waiting for emergency services to extract his body from under the carriages. Rescuers pronounced him dead at the scene. Even though the video answered all the questions, the police continued the investigation and ruled out criminal intent. To prevent similar incidents from happening again, the Minister of Transport ordered protective platform doors to be installed at all LRT stations. Paulus Petronius. On the 13th of July 2020, several surveillance cameras recorded 24-year-old Paulus Petronius laughing and fooling around with the man who would end his life only a few hours later. In the hours preceding the murder, Paulus was seen in the company of 20-year-old Sean Bewley. They seemed to be in good spirits, laughing, joking, and chatting casually in the hallway of a building before heading to a nearby shop. But everything changed when they returned to a residential complex on Sherville Rise, Heathtown. In the flat of Paulus's girlfriend, an argument flared up between the men over some kind of deal. In the heat of the quarrel, Sean pulled out a hunting knife and stabbed Paulus once. The wound was catastrophic. The blade pierced his diaphragm, liver, and the protective sac around his heart. One of the coronary arteries was completely severed. Paulus died at the scene. Sean, leaving his friend to die, fled. Despite the ferocity of the attack, he wandered the streets with astonishing calm. He disposed of the knife, called a taxi, and went to Shrewsbury, where he was arrested 2 days later. Although the killer was caught, the murder weapon could not be found at first. Authorities in what was described as Vermont combed through tons of video footage while Sean kept changing his story. At first, he claimed that he had blacked out because of an epileptic seizure. Later, he said that he and Paulus had been fencing with knives, and he did not remember anything. Eventually, the bloody knife was found hidden in a pile of dirt between a fence and a wall. On the 13th of January 2022, Sean Bewley was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. Cristina Ortiz Loausano. On the 21st of September 2019, at about 9:50 p.m., surveillance cameras recorded Cristina Ortiz Loausano walking to a date with a new man. First, they went to the Sprinkles ice cream shop, then to the Giddy Bridge pub on London Road. They had no idea that Christina's ex-boyfriend was secretly following them. In April 2018, Cristina had moved to the United Kingdom from Spain with her long-term boyfriend, Abdelaziz Elia Choi Orza. The couple had met at school, dated for 12 years, and lived together in Liverpool before moving to Southampton. But in August 2019, Cristina ended the relationship. She was able to move on, but Abdelaziz could not. That fateful evening, he hid in the shadows, watching, following, and waiting. When Cristina and her date headed toward her home on Spear Road, cameras recorded Abdelaziz walking behind them. At the entrance to her building, he stood holding flowers in his hands. When Cristina approached, he followed her inside while her date waited outside. Once in the flat, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her 23 times in the neck, chest, and abdomen. Cristina was pronounced dead at the scene. Police found Abdelaziz in the garden with stab wounds to his chest and other minor injuries. After treatment, he was brought to court. On the 17th of March 2020, Abdelaziz Elia Choi Orza was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. Level 6. A mother's love and a mother's madness. In this surveillance footage, 36-year-old Odessa Carey Jr. is calmly walking down the street. Slung over her shoulder is a blue bag, and in her hand is a white plastic shopping bag. Inside the blue bag is the severed head of her 73-year-old mother, who was also named Odessa Carey. The day before this recording was made, Odessa Jr. had smashed her mother's skull with a hammer, ending her life instantly. Then, methodically and cold-bloodedly, she cut off the head using knives and scissors. After that, she took the severed head to the bathroom, removed the brain, and placed the head into that same blue bag. With the bag on her shoulder, she left the house as if going for a walk and headed to visit a family friend, John Murray. At John's house, with dried blood on her hands, Odessa first wiped them with baby wipes and then showed him what she was carrying. With chilling calm, she took her mother's head out of the bag and kissed it right in front of the stunned man. John did not have a phone to call the police immediately, so he did so only the next day. When the officers found Odessa, she was sitting blankly in a house in Guide Post, and the severed head was hidden in a cupboard under the sink. As the officers read her rights, she stared into the void. The shocking detail. Earlier that same year, despite obvious signs of mental instability and warnings from relatives, Odessa Carey Jr. had been discharged from a psychiatric hospital, classified as a low-risk case. She had a history of assaults on her own mother and cruelty to pets. In the end, she was found responsible for her mother's death, but because of a severe mental disorder, she was sent not to prison, but to a high-security psychiatric hospital. The disappearance of Meta Price. On the 29th of October 2014, the relatives and friends of 44-year-old Meta Price Valentine reported her missing. In the last days before her disappearance, she had been behaving strangely. When she called her mother the day before, her speech had been rambling and full of riddles. That evening, at about 5:30 p.m., surveillance cameras recorded Meta walking toward her apartment complex in Sycamore Park after a neighborhood meeting. At the moment she entered the building, a man ran after her. It was the last time she was seen. She failed to show up for her Bible study class and stopped answering calls. Police quickly identified the pursuer. It was Reginald McDowell, her ex-partner, who had a history of violence against her. Back in 1999, when Meta had been dating another man, Reginald had kidnapped the couple, robbed them, and shot them. He had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but served only 10. After his release in 2011, he resumed a relationship with Meta, which again ended in a breakup in October 2014, just 2 weeks before her disappearance. Initially, Reginald cooperated with the investigation, but then he completely cut off contact. On the 30th of March 2018, he was formally charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping in connection with Meta's disappearance. He remains at large to this day. Meta Valentine has never been found, neither alive nor dead. The murder of Ronan Kanda. On the 29th of June 2019, 16-year-old Ronan Kanda was walking home after visiting a friend to buy a controller for a PlayStation. It was about 8 p.m. Ronan was walking through Wolverhampton, wearing headphones and smiling at something on his phone screen, completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind. Earlier that same day, 17-year-old Prabjit Virkesa had collected from a local post office a set of ninja swords and a large machete. He had ordered them online under a false name and went hunting to recover some kind of debt. Together with his 17-year-old friend Sukhman Shergill, Prabjit tracked Ronan as he left his friend's house and mistakenly took him for the person who owed him money. Just a few meters from his house, Ronan was stabbed twice with a sword. One blow went deep into his thigh, the other pierced his heart. He collapsed to the ground and died at the scene. Only then did the attackers realize that they had killed the wrong person. In a panic, they fled, disposing of the weapons and blood-stained clothing in an attempt to cover their tracks. But justice caught up with them. Within a few days, Both were arrested and charged with murder. On the 13th of July 2023, Prabjit Virkesa and Sukhman Shergill were sentenced to life imprisonment with minimum terms of 18 and 16 years respectively. After Ronan's death, lawmakers and his grieving family launched a campaign to tighten controls on online knife sales. His case gave tragic new urgency to national efforts to restrict access to dangerous weapons. Level 7. Louise Smith. On the 8th of May 2020, 16-year-old Louise Smith was reported missing after she failed to return from school. Just a month earlier, she had moved in with her older cousin, Cassian Jane May, and her husband, Shane May. They all lived together in Lee Park, Hampshire. As soon as Louise was officially declared missing, investigators began combing through hours of CCTV footage to reconstruct her route and determine why she disappeared. On the 8th of May 2020, around noon, cameras recorded Louise leaving the house with her uncle, Shane. The two of them headed toward Havant Thicket at about 11:45 a.m. That same day, Shane appeared on camera again in the afternoon, but this time alone. He was buying pizza and a bottle of Lucozade at a local shop. Later, he returned home alone as well. Louise was nowhere to be seen. 13 days later, Louise's body was discovered in a clearing in Havant Thicket, about 40 minutes' walk from her home. It had been subjected to horrific abuse and severely burned. The damage was so extensive that dental records had to be used to identify her. Shane May was arrested almost immediately, but he denied any involvement in her death. He insisted that, although he had walked with her that morning, he had turned back before reaching the shops. However, as CCTV recordings, phone data, and forensic evidence began to contradict his story, he eventually admitted that he had spent more time with her than he had originally claimed. At the end of 2020, he confessed that he had lured her into Havant Thicket, but still denied murder. Instead, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, claiming that he had lost control and had not intended to kill her. The court rejected his version of events and sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The sword attack. On the 30th of April 2024, shortly before 7 a.m., 36-year-old Marcus Arduini Manzo drove a grey van into a pedestrian on a quiet residential street in Hainault, East London. Moments later, he stepped out of the vehicle in a yellow hoodie, holding a samurai sword. What followed was a 20-minute outburst of pure terror. Marcus raced through the streets, chasing and slashing at random passers-by. He then burst into a nearby home, attacking a married couple while their 4-year-old child slept upstairs. At about 7:15 a.m., 14-year-old Daniel, wearing sports kit and headphones, was walking to school. Manzo attacked him from behind, striking his chest and neck. The injuries were incompatible with life. Daniel died in the street. By that time, the police had already arrived at the scene and were trying to gain control, but Manzo did not stop. He continued rampaging, swinging the weapon, and several officers were eventually stabbed. Constable Yasmin Mazoom Whitfield and Inspector Malaloy Campbell, who tried to subdue him, sustained serious injuries. In panic, officers shouted to residents, "Lock your doors!" while Manzo prowled the area. He was finally incapacitated at about 7:22 a.m. after the police used a taser and knocked him to the ground. On the 25th of June 2025, Marcus Arduini Manzo was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. Crimes of minors. On the 29th of May 2024, 63-year-old Scott Hubermale was riding his bicycle to work at the Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque when a car suddenly turned onto the bike path and hit him. By the time authorities arrived, he was dead. There were no clues and no leads. Initially, the police obtained surveillance footage from a nearby church that showed the car but not its occupants. For many months, no arrests were made. There were no tips, no suspects, no license plate number, and no recording linking anyone to the crime. That remained the case until 2025, when a viral video online caught the investigators' attention. Faster before they start watching. You are driving VE airy fast. Just ram him, bro. Just ram him. Yes, just ram him. Accelerate to 15 to 20. In the video, two teenagers can be heard laughing and planning the attack. One of them says, "Just ram him, bro." Immediately before the car struck Scott, a school principal recognized the voices in the recording, and several witnesses confirmed who they belonged to. On the 17th of March 2025, a 13-year-old boy was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, leaving the scene of a crime and unlawful possession of a firearm. An 11-year-old was also taken into custody. Later, in May 2025, a 15-year-old whose voice had been identified in a news report on the incident was arrested. Now, a total of 4 suspects have been charged. The mass shooting in Minnesota. On the 29th of November 2020, at exactly 2:19 a.m., police received a call about fireworks or gunshots at the Shady Oaks apartment complex in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Officer Cody Neem was dispatched to patrol the area, not realizing he was walking into an ambush. Moments after he arrived, shots were fired through the side window into Officer Neem's patrol car. He quickly took cover and called for backup. The 8-hour siege that followed kept the entire neighborhood in terror. At first, officers could not determine where the shots were coming from, but over time, the danger only escalated. The shooter was no longer targeting only the police. He began firing at the apartment complex, at neighbors, at passing cars, at anyone going about their business, unaware of the threat. It became clear that his targets were not the officers. His targets were the residents, and the police needed to act quickly. They understood that 2 things had to be done. First, to keep the shooter engaged and prevent him from changing position. Second, to evacuate the building. But there was one major obstacle. They did not have a key fob to access the complex. The officers split into 2 groups. One stayed in position to distract the shooter. The other went around the back of the building, trying to evacuate residents through the rear entrance. At 2:35 a.m., the shooter fired at 60-year-old resident Daniel Thorpe, who was leaving the building completely unaware of what was happening. He was wounded. Moments later, a screaming woman ran out of the building. She had seen the shooter at the far end of the 2nd floor. She gave the officers her key fob and hid in her car. The shooter then opened fire again, this time at a car driving past the complex. The driver, Preston Flink, was shot in the leg and was saved by the officers. By 3 a.m., a SWAT team had arrived and been activated. With reinforcements and access to the building, the officers managed to evacuate residents from the 1st floor. They also made sure no one remained in open areas where the shooter could hit them. For some time, the shooting stopped. With dawn, the police finally gained a full view of the situation. With drones in the air and a state patrol sniper in position, they spotted the shooter on the 3rd floor. Officers tried to negotiate, but he refused to communicate. 7 hours passed, and the police ran out of options. At 9 a.m., tear gas was launched into the flat. Forced to move, the shooter approached the window. At that moment, the state patrol sniper fired, shattering the glass and wounding him. Disarmed, the shooter surrendered and was taken into custody. He was identified as 21-year-old Devin Weiland. In a shocking twist, investigators discovered that he himself had made the original 911 call. It had all been an elaborate setup to lure Officer Neem into an ambush. During interrogation, Weiland explained that he wanted to die but did not believe in suicide. So he devised a plan: report a fake incident, provoke the police, and make them shoot him. That is why he never aimed directly at the officers. But the court did not accept his explanation. He was found guilty on 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree assault with a deadly weapon. On the 28th of February 2023, Devin Weiland was sentenced to 50 years in prison.